We all want to be happy, but is happiness an objective reality that can be granted to you by the government, or something that you must choose to embrace no matter your circumstances? James Allsup seems to think it's the former, but I'll be arguing for the latter. Hello everyone, this is My Two Cents. Parts 1 and 2 of this response are linked below. Be sure to check those out first if you haven't already. Without further ado, here's the rest of the response to James Allsup on big government.
We have effectively handed over control of our country to moneyed elites, wealthy tech executives, and unaccountable, unelected, massive international conglomerates.
I should point out that I am unaware of any one of these corporations or conglomerates who has sent men with guns to your house in order to force you to buy their products. What Mr. Allsup is really complaining about is that government is using force to advance the interests of corporations because these corporations pay them off to do so. My question is, how exactly does he intend to stop this from happening? So long as government has the perceived legitimacy to use force, how are you going to stop politicians from acting in their own interests and accepting bribes from these wealthy individuals and corporations? There is no shortage of commentators spouting this idea that government should serve the people, not corporations. But are corporations not simply groups of people? And different people have different interests, which is why any government that interferes in voluntary transactions will always advance the interests of some while hindering the interests of others. As I pointed out in the last video, political corruption goes up the less economically free a country is, which would suggest that corporations are not the problem. Rather, the problem stems from the power of government itself.
We're told by many conservatives and advocates for the free market that in exchange for this unprecedented corporate power, Americans are now happier and living better than ever before. Is rampant consumer capitalism really making us happier? I've heard Ben Shapiro make this argument several times in his college speeches against socialism. A poor person today can afford more consumer goods than a rich person 60 years ago could. 2 microwaves, 4 TVs, 2 cars per household, Americans are now better off than ever before.
Everyone pay close attention to that tweet. Does it say that people are happier, or does it say that they are living better? Whether consciously done or not, Allsup is reading something into Shapiro's statement that isn't there, and as we'll see, this straw man is key to the rest of his case for big government. It is unquestionably true that poor people today are living immensely more prosperous lives than they were 100 years ago. And Allsup concedes this. I should also point out that the poor in America are substantially better off than the majority of middle-class individuals in Europe. However, as to the question of whether or not people are happier today, that is a separate question, and one that is entirely subjective.
This argument equates ownership of consumer goods to happiness.
That's a straw man, James. I don't know if Shapiro has ever said this in another context, but the tweet you showed said nothing about happiness.
Are you happy because you can browse Facebook for 6 hours a day and watch a new Marvel movie every 4 weeks? Or are you distracted, caught in a pleasure-reward cycle, seeking out stimuli that you know will satiate the reward sector of your brain? Does a smoker become happier when he's presented with 10 different choices of cigarette instead of 2? Or is he just an addict?
You see, this is exactly the problem. Have you ever stopped to think about what happiness is exactly? Merriam-Webster dictionary defines happy, in the context of a person, as enjoying or characterized by well-being or contentment. And that's the problem. Material prosperity is something that can be objectively measured, but personal contentment cannot. Stop and think for a minute. I think all of us, at one time or another, have met someone who by all objective measures was poor, and yet they were happy and content. But at the same time, we meet people who are by all objective measures rich, and yet these people can be some of the most unhappy and uncontent people. One of my favorite authors of all time, C.S. Lewis, said this in his essay, "We Have No Right to Happiness." A right to happiness doesn't, for me, make much more sense than a right to be 6 feet tall or have a millionaire for your father, or to get good weather whenever you want to have a picnic. As Lewis explained, every person is affected by numerous factors outside their own control, and even the government cannot change this. For that reason, happiness is a choice made by individuals to be content with their circumstances, not something inherent to one's lifestyle or material wealth. The point of Allsup's video is supposed to be that a strong national government is better for the people than the freedom to make their own choices. But I find it telling that in order to argue for this, he has to resort to claims about happiness, a factor that is totally subjective and outside the realm of the government's control.
What brings people happiness? Family, community, camaraderie, friendship, but more importantly, a sense of purpose, a sense that they are part of something greater, something important.
I happen to agree that family, friendship, and a sense of purpose do bring happiness when they are embraced by individuals. But again, there is no objective measure by which you can show that one person is happier than another, apart from their own claim of being happy. Happiness is a choice that must be made by individuals, not something that can be forced at the barrel of a gun.
People are increasingly atomized and cut off from one another, as the elites, and often the political left, attempt to destroy the last places people can make real bonds, build real communities that are not based around consumerism. We see this on the college campus with the continued campaign to kill off the fraternity system, or at least make it inclusive and welcome women. Similar motivations are behind the continued attacks on male-dominated communities, whether it's a professional association or internet gaming community. For modern people, connections have been synthesized if they exist at all. You bond over which sports team you like, which Netflix show you prefer, whether you're Team Marvel or Team DC. Our identities are no longer based on who we are, but which products we choose to consume. This leads to unfulfillment, a feeling of absence. Product has become cheaper and easier to consume than ever before. Never before has a man been able to anesthetize himself through a daily intake of product on a median salary.
Again, I largely agree that if one seeks to find happiness in consumer goods or online relationships, they are likely to fail. I agree that powerfully placed leftists are trying to destroy the family and other community institutions in order to force a greater dependency on government. But this doesn't change the fact that happiness is not something that can be forced on people. The leftists want to point guns at your head and say, "Live your life our way, because we know what's better for you than you do." James Allsup wants the government to point guns at your head and say, "Live your life James Allsup's way, because he knows what's better for you than you do." Why does James Allsup's government have the right to do this, but not the equally powerful government that leftists envision? Do you think it should be you deciding whether your decisions make you happy, or the government? Who other than you can decide whether or not you're happy?
You can see the movies, you can watch the shows, you can buy the widgets, you can browse Reddit, you can do this every day until you die, existing in homeostasis as a consumption and production unit, but ultimately, as you die, you will die unfulfilled.
And if you die unfulfilled, that's on you. Do you seriously think that by forcing people to engage in certain behaviors and abstain from others, you can force them to live and die happily? I don't have a problem with you advising people that certain behaviors are constructive and others destructive. But if you think that you have the right to force other people to do things your way because you know better than them, then on what basis do you condemn the leftists that seek to do exactly the same to you? If the only standard you can appeal to is happiness, you've proven that your case for big government is no more objective than that of the leftists you condemn.
All the freedom in the world, and we use it to collect Funko Pops and candies from various third world countries. There is no sense of purpose anymore, except for the synthetic one given to us by the elites. Get in student debt, be a good consumer, don't have kids because they're bad for the environment and they scream, they're so annoying. Celebrate a woman's right to choose and to never have a husband. Girls, don't get married because that makes you property. You're a strong woman, you don't need no man. Guys, don't get married because all women are Machiavellian monsters out to steal your $6,000 nest egg and your 2002 Dodge Neon. Just buy the product, get excited for next MCU movie, and pay rent forever. When you reject the nation state in favor of economic liberalism and consumerism, this is what you get.
Really? Because last I checked, all those things you just complained about government-provided student loans which lead to perpetual debt, legal disincentives to marrying and having children, and price controls that make it harder to purchase your own property, are the result of policies enforced by government, not the natural outgrowths of people making free voluntary decisions. If they were, the government wouldn't have to use force to achieve those ends. So why then are you so gung-ho about strong government? It wasn't economic liberalism and consumerism that gave you these things. It was the nation-state that you're so eager to embrace.
Corporations are not benevolent overlords looking out for you. They're not waiting for the day they will trickle wealth down upon you.
Oh, for goodness sake. Trickle-down economics does not exist, and no libertarian, or economist for that matter, has ever claimed that it does. Trickle-down economics is a term first used by American comedian Will Rogers to refer to economic interventions undertaken by President Herbert Hoover during the Great Depression. In other words, it refers to policies taken by a strong central government, the very thing you advocate.
They don't care about you. They care about extracting your money and having you work for them for as long as they can, for as little as they can get away with paying you.
Oh, really? Because last I checked, they can't extract your money unless you actually want to buy their products. And they can't hire anyone unless they're offering enough money that people actually believe it's worthwhile to be employed there. Corporations can't force you to do anything. Only government can do that.
That's not evil, it's simply in their interest. Some corporations are definitely evil, but most aren't. They're just profiting from the system they're given. But freedom, you say. You want to take away my freedom. If marketing companies, social media companies, intellectuals, pornographers, and users already have you enslaved, what freedom do you have to give up?
For crying out loud, Allsup. If you choose of your own free will to purchase products, take out loans, or live your life a certain way, that is not slavery. People being forced to live with the consequences of their voluntarily chosen bad decisions is not slavery. Slavery is using force to coerce behaviors that a person would not voluntarily choose to engage in. Exactly what you're advocating. The only difference between you and a leftist is that you disagree about what the slave should be forced to do. You are the one advocating using force against peaceful people to achieve your desired ends. Not us libertarians.
You deserve better than to be fat and numb, surrounded by products designed to distract you from your lack of existential purpose.
If a person deserves better than that which they have voluntarily chosen, they have no one to blame but themselves. And it's not your job to fix them, any more than it's Antifa's job to fix you for your wrongthink.
I've had enough of looking around at societal ills caused by unregulated corporate power and hearing people say, well, we can't change that because that would mean big government, and big government is bad.
As I already pointed out, unchecked corporate power can only result from big government, and so he's criticizing the very thing he's allegedly arguing for.
I understand. The US federal government, as it currently exists, is a bad example of what a state should be. Government is supposed to be the vehicle by which the people of the nation-state express their will. The only reason to oppose government is because you believe, or you know, that the government will eventually be co-opted by people that hate you and will use that government to destroy you.
And that's what governments do. Politicians inevitably act in their own interests, not in the interests of some nebulous, undefined group called the people. Different people have different interests, and when you give a certain group of people the right to use force against others, they will always use that power to advance their own interests. There is no such thing as an uncorruptible government. Such a government would have to be ruled by a morally perfect, all-knowing, all-powerful being. Sound like anything familiar? And people tell me I'm crazy for calling statism a religion.
Rhetorically, that makes sense, but wake up. Those people already control the government. As I see it, the pragmatic fight is for pro-family social policies and free speech legislation. Big tech has no reason to protect political speech that threatens the power of big tech. That speech can only exist if the state is willing to protect it. The long-term fight is for a nation-state united in purpose, history, culture, and spirit. We already know that ideal is achievable in European countries. It's already been done across Scandinavia and Northern Europe. The purpose of this video is to get you to challenge your preconceived notions about the relationship between the state, the people, corporations, capital, and you. Idealistic? Perhaps. But I'm increasingly convinced that this third position, nationalistic yet neither economically right nor left, is the only way forward to protect the American family, the American worker, and the American middle class.
Funny how he closes by citing the Nordic countries, since he earlier argued for protectionist economic policies and increased government regulations for corporations. As I and others have pointed out before, the Nordic countries do have very expansive welfare states, but this has only been sustainable for as long as it has because they otherwise embrace free markets, free trade, lack of business regulations, low corporate taxes, no government-mandated minimum wage, and a whole host of other things that big government advocates abhor. We can argue about what makes people in the Nordic countries happier than Americans, but again, happiness is subjective, and I doubt that any Nordic citizen would tell you that his happiness stems first and foremost from the government telling him what he ought to do from the cradle to the grave. In summary, my argument against James Allsup's case for big government is this. As I've shown, the problems he sees in our society are not caused by voluntary interactions, but by policies enforced by a strong central government. Since people inevitably act in their own interest, there is no way to stop politicians from using the force of government to better themselves, not the people. Further, since different people have different interests, there is no course of action that benefits the people as a whole. All government actions will benefit some at the expense of others. The moments you decide that government should have the power to control people's lives because they know better for you than you do, you can't complain when the government decides to turn around and force you to do things that you disagree with. If you only support big government when you and your team are in control, then what you really support is might makes right. This may sound great to you, but how many times in history has this resulted in the utopia that politicians promise? The same government that has the power to give you everything you want is a government that has the power to take everything that you have. And that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, as well as hit the bell to receive notifications so that you never miss an upload. And if you're a fan of my channel, please consider supporting me on Subscribestar, Bitbacker, or Patreon to receive special rewards. All links can be found in the About section of my website, my2centsvideos.com.